Okay. Well, welcome. This is a regular board meeting of San Mateo County Board of Supervisors for Tuesday, January the 10th, 2017. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Pine?
Here.
Supervisor Groom?
Present.
Supervisor Slocum?
Here.
Supervisor Canepa?
Here.
President Horsley?
Here. So it's now time for public comment. Do we have any public comment?
We do. Public comment is reserved for persons wishing to address the board on county-related matters that are not otherwise on this agenda, as well as items that are listed on the consent agenda. You will be provided 2 minutes, and an extension may be provided at the discretion of the board president. First, we have Mr. Martin Fox.
Good morning, President Horsley, members of the board, my fellow veterans, Supervisor Slocum and Mr. Maltby, and County Counsel Mr. Byers. Thank you for your service to the county, and thank you for authorizing Laura's Law, known as assisted outpatient treatment. Please improve upon the disciplined compassion of the outpatient treatment Laura's Law provides to persons living with serious mental illness that is complicated by an inability to recognize their need for treatment, and waive all of the civil and criminal immunities that the intellectually and morally corrupt Lanner and Peaches Short Act gives to those who decide to limit or deny treatment to the seriously mentally ill. The Stepping Up Summit, taking place in Sacramento on Wednesday and Thursday, January 18th and 19th, is a jail diversion for the mentally ill program planning event that the California State Association of Counties invited local officials, elected officials, members of local law enforcement, and county behavioral health professionals to attend. The invitation's limited scope ignores people living with serious mental illness who do not seek treatment, like the Iraq War veteran who flew with a firearm and ammunition from Alaska to an airport in Florida before opening fire. Serious mental illness, complicated by an inability to recognize the need for treatment, does not respect boundaries of moral human conduct any more than it respects political boundaries like county and state lines. Family members, who are the true first responders to most mental health crises, and veterans should have been invited. The problems created by the intellectually and morally bankrupt Lanner and Peaches Short Act civil law are only mitigated by Laura's Law. A criminal justice jail diversion for the mentally ill program will not solve them. Therefore, I ask you once again to please improve upon the disciplined compassion of the outpatient treatment Laura's Law provides to persons with serious mental illness who do not recognize their need for treatment, and waive all of the civil and criminal immunities that the Lanner and Peaches Short Act gives to those who decide to limit or deny treatment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fox.
Our final speaker is Catherine M.K. Geary.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Catherine M.K. Geary. I'm a freelance journalist corresponding mainly with the LA Times. I'm not sure if you caught too much of the sessions, or shall we say Senator Sessions and his arguments with, not really arguments, that's kind of what surprises me, and it concerns me, especially when it comes to the state of California and the economy of the state of California being pretty far up there on the global map. We have Silicon Valley, we have Hollywood down in LA. We have a takeover of sorts from one faction to the other, which I think is stemming from a long time ago. Meryl Streep stepping up to bat for the press and the disabled, of both which I'm a member. And I have a couple of requests. Being on the air here is a plus. You can't bootleg me, for one thing. I voted for Clinton. I'm not either party, but I voted for Clinton because I don't feel like Mr. Trump is acting on behalf of the middle class, the working class. Everyone's called run of the mill, and California is not run of the mill. Silicon Valley is a cutting edge. I hear that China wants a piece of Silicon Valley. Everybody wants to take California apart by the seams and spread the wealth. That's not really what's happening at the top. And I'd like to make this public statement to anyone that happens to listen, from Megan Kelly to anyone else I'm in touch with. California is not for sale. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was our last public comment.
Thank you, Sherry. It's now time to set the agenda.
I move to set the agenda and to approve the consent
Actually,
calendar.
I want to pull one item number 19 off of consent. Item 19.
Okay.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to take item number 19 first. Louise Rogers, and item number 19, actually, we talked about this a little bit before. It's a resolution authorizing an agreement with the city and county of San Francisco on HIV services. And I was just curious about, it has a percentage, but it doesn't actually have the number of people that we actually treat. And I was curious about, what's the, you don't have to know the exact number, but just an approximation. How many people actually are receiving treatment?
Supervisor Horsley, President Horsley, it's about 1,600 people, and that number has been relatively stable in San Mateo County. But it's about 1,600 people living with HIV who are targeted for that. For the 78% is about 1,600 people.
Okay.
And of course, they have numerous different coverages, but the Ryan White Care funding really helps support the overall care of people who have HIV. Most of them also have Medicare, and many of them have Medi-Cal. Thank you.
Thanks. In that case, I will make a motion to approve item number 19. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we'll go to our first item of 9 a.m. It's the acting as a governing board of a county service area 8 to conduct a public hearing in the 2017 garbage and recyclable rates for county service area number 8. Danielle?
I think we have the wrong presentation up. Good morning. We're just going to swap out presentations. We have two very similar items back to back. Great. President Horsley, members of the board, Mr. Maltby and Mr. Byers. My name is Danielle Lee, and I'm here on behalf of the Office of Sustainability to present the 2017 County Franchise Area Garbage and Recycling Rates to you. The county manages two franchised areas within the unincorporated area, one of which is called County Franchise Area. It's a collection of multiple unincorporated pockets. These two franchises are both part of a joint powers authority referred to as the South Bayside Waste Management Authority, or the SBWMA. Recology, San Mateo County provides weekly collection of the garbage, recycling, and compost. And South Bay Recycling provides the processing and disposal and transportation of those materials at the Shoreway Environmental Center. The county is one of the 12 member agencies of the JPA, and the agreements with both of those contractors end actually end December 31st, 2020. For county franchise area, you can see all of the unincorporated pockets are numbered. Number 7 is North Fair Oaks, and all of the remaining pockets are what comprise county franchise area. Just a little bit of background information for you on the rates. Every year, both contractors submit what we call annual compensation applications. And for 2017, they submitted those to the SBWMA. Recology's compensation is based on a variety of metrics related to collection. So lifts, truck time, labor especially. And those are tied to CPI and fuel in particular affect those rates. SBR's compensation is more based on the operations at the transfer station, processing and transferring and disposal costs for the waste itself. The compensation application also includes the administrative costs, both for the SBWMA, the city of San Carlos, where the JPA is housed, and then the county's franchise fees. So the 2017 rate application process, essentially we received that application from the the SBWMA, and then the county does its own analysis to look at the longer-term projections, smoothing, rate considerations that we'd like to take into account. As for the county franchise area, in 2014, the CFA experienced a revenue shortfall. In 2015, that was not the case. The commercial bins and the larger residential bins are essentially generating revenue that's sufficient to cover their cost. So you'll see that our rate proposal is really focused on the smallest residential bins, so that we can work to align the cost of service to the actual rates that we charge. The proposed rate increase represents a 3% increase on just those smallest residential carts. The 20-gallon cart would increase 91 cents per month to a total of $31.21, and the 32-gallon cart would increase $1.08 per month to a total of $36.98. As I mentioned, the larger residential carts and the commercial rates would all stay the same. So here it is in a table format, just to be able to see it's a relatively modest increase, although we recognize we're trying to be judicious in that. Here's a comparison for you, just to get a sense of what neighboring jurisdictions are charging for similar sized carts. One thing to note about the county franchise area, those unincorporated pockets tend to be in hillier locations, sort of residential areas that are a little bit harder to reach. And because a lot of the time is associated with labor and transportation, the rates are higher than some of the neighboring jurisdictions. We are looking at that, and we're also trying to make sure that our rates align as much as possible to the cost of service. So we're trying to make sure that we every year close that gap. I should mention that to date we have received 2 letters of protest with regards to the rates for the county franchised area, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Any questions?
When we receive letters of protest, do we respond? Do we thank, and do we see if they have any further questions, or do we just?
We typically register them, we report them to the board. I'm happy to actually send out a response to those residents. I don't know if that's been the practice 100% of the time, but we can do that, certainly.
I think perhaps we could send a letter explaining what your staff report says.
Certainly.
Okay,
We'll do
thanks.
that.
Just a quick question, Mr. President. I know there's a lot of analysis and a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes before any of these matters ever get to SBWMA.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if someone, maybe Lillian or you, could describe, at a high level and briefly, of what that process is. I know you pore over the data and things are audited. So I think the end result of all that process is the establishment of these rates, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the county embarks on a very thorough process to review the rate proposals. First, the SBWMA does its own analysis. Basically, the contractors submit these rate applications that are very detailed. So every increase in cost, every category that they're allowed to increase, all of the indices like CPI and fuel, all of those costs are adjusted. And then the SBWMA goes through and makes sure that they are comfortable with all of those increases. They don't have any disputes. And then the county receives that report. And then we take it and we do a further analysis. We actually hired outside consultants to help us with that review. This year it was conducted by HFH, I think, Hilton, HFH Consultants. They did another review. They looked at a longer term projection for our rates. So not only are we looking to make sure that we reconcile for the annual rate, but that through our projections to the end of the contract that we think that we're going to be having smooth rates. We don't want to have, a flat rate one year and then a spike in rates next year when we see fuel prices might go up or things like that. So they give us longer term projections as well as do another round of review on every single cost item.
Thank you.
After all of that, then we come and put together a proposal. Yeah,
It's a thorough process.
it is. It takes months.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Supervisor Pine?
It always kind of confuses me a little bit about who SBWMA serves. So it serves these 10 cities, and it serves the West Bay Sanitary District.
Yes.
And the West Bay Sanitary District consists of Menlo Park, Atherton, Patola Valley. Does it also have all of EPA and Woodside in there too? Their website's kind of unclear about that.
Woodside.
I'm not sure. I know they have portions of Portola Valley and some other areas, but the portion that represents the garbage is really the unincorporated pocket, because Atherton and the other jurisdictions have their own.
Franchises.
Maybe you want to.
I can follow up offline on it.
We're happy to send a map of the actual areas, yeah. It's an interesting situation where the sanitary district represents the solid waste franchise for that one
Yeah,
pocket.
because when you read their description, it appears that they only do a portion of EPA and Woodside. So I wonder who does the other portion.
Right, the city, yeah. The city itself. So the
kinda-
sanitary
yeah.
district does the piece and then the city does the remainder.
Any other questions? If not, I'm going to open the public hearing. Is there a motion to open the public hearing?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, is there any comments from the public? There being none, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, what's the pleasure of the board?
Well, I would make a motion, Mr. President, if it's okay with my colleagues, to adopt the resolution or approve the resolution adopting the 2017 garbage and recyclable rates in County Service Area Number 8, i.e. North Fair Oaks.
County franchise area, and we will do the North Fair Oaks.
I think what happened was we reversed them, so I think what's before the board right now, correct me if I'm wrong, is item number 2, which is all the unincorporated areas. Is that right? So we're doing CSA North Fair Oaks next. Is that right? These are the unincorporated franchise areas.
Sorry, maybe the item order got swapped. But for the county service area, yes.
Are we doing item number?
I thought we were
franchise
doing
area.
item number 2, but or 1 or whatever. So we did it in reverse order then.
So Danielle,
You did it, yeah, you did number 8.
I did the
and
county
actually you did number
franchise
2.
area.
Okay.
My apologies.
That's okay.
I thought the order was swapped on the agenda.
That's fine.
so the motion would be on number 2 instead of number 1.
Okay.
So you want to restate your motion then in that case?
No.
It's on, no?
Move that we approve a resolution adopting the 2017 garbage and recyclable rates for the unincorporated franchised area within the South Bayside Waste Management Authority service area, exclusive of County Service Area Number 8 and the West Bay Sanitary District.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, done. Now we'll go on to the other one.
Thank you.
Whatever.
Okay, President Horsley, members of the board, Mr. Maltby, Mr. Byers, I'm also pleased to be here to present the North Fair Oaks garbage and recycling rates for 2017.
She was doing that too.
The background is very much the same. The county is one of the 12 member agencies of the JPA, the SBWMA. Both contracts end December 31st, 2020. The unincorporated area that we're discussing now is area number 7 labeled on the map for North Fair Oaks, CSA 8. And the rate setting process, as I mentioned, the contractors submit their annual applications. Both the JPA and then the county review those applications and then bring a proposal to your board for a rate increase. The compensation application also includes the administrative costs associated with the franchise agreements and the JPA. For CSA 8, 2015 and 2016 experienced revenue shortfalls. The commercial bins are generating sufficient revenue to cover projected costs, and so our rate increase was again focused on the residential. Our overall goal is to align the rates to the cost of service through the end of this contract. Our rate proposal is to increase 5% on the 2 32-gallon or 1 64-gallon cart size. So essentially the same volume, but you can get 2 smaller ones or 1 larger one. The new rate would be $29.45 per month, which is a $1.45 increase. And there are no proposed rate increases for the commercial rates. Here, it's the same rate information in table format. Here's some comparison information. We pulled rates for the 64-gallon cart size because that's the minimum garbage subscription service level in CSA 8. As you can see, the county fares fairly well. There are, East Palo Alto is an exception in that their minimum cart size is 96 gallons. And so even though that price is higher, it's for a larger volume of garbage. We've received one letter of protest for North Fair Oaks for the rates, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Any questions? There being no questions, I will take a motion to open the public hearing. Would somebody like to make a motion to open the public hearing?
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Pine. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, is there any public comment? There being none, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll move to close the public hearing.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lee. Done. Now we're-
Don't we have to vote on the resolution?
Oh, we have to vote on a resolution. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Yeah, aye.
I was just trying to get through that fast. Okay, item number 3 is the public hearing regarding a vacation of the public, it's actually vacating, I guess, of the public service easement. Mr. Calderon.
President Horsley, Honorable Supervisors, County Manager, County Council, good morning. I'm here today to present on a proposed vacation of a public service easement located at 508 Oak Park Way in Emerald Lake Hills. It is my understanding that it's been a while since a vacation has come before the board, so I just wanted to show you the government code section that we follow for this procedure, which is Street and Highway Code Section 8321B, which states 5 or more freeholders may petition the Board of Supervisors to vacate a public service easement under this chapter, and that one of the applicants or one of the petitioners must reside within the township in which the public service easement proposed to be vacated is located. Further, the process we go through, the procedure we go through to do this is an applicant will come to the county, they'll come to Real Property Services, and they will ask to vacate a specific easement. At that point, we will do an initial determination with the Department of Public Works to make sure that they don't have a current or future public use for this easement. If at that time they say they do have a current or future public use for this easement, that process will be stopped and we'll let the applicant know. If there is no use for it, then we will go forward and the applicant will file a petition for vacation of easement, and they'll have to get at least five signatures, and they'll submit that to the county along with a fee for to cover the costs as well as a title report. At that point, we'll send a notice out letting utility and service providers know that this petition has been filed, and we will also let residents within 500 feet know that this process has been started. If at no point, if we don't have any objections, or if there is an objection and the applicant and the person objecting or party objecting are able to come to an agreement, we'll take this to the Planning Commission for a general plan conformity hearing, after which we'll bring it here to the Board of Supervisors for consideration of a resolution. The easement that we're here to discuss today is located at 508 Oak Park Way in Emerald Lake Hills. It's a public service easement. It was granted to the county originally in 1927, but was not accepted by the board until 1983. The closest utility the county has there is a sanitary sewer line. It's located within the road right-of-way, and for this reason, Public Works made a determination that that there's no public use from the county perspective for this easement. Here you'll see a map of where the easement is located. It's located at the terminus there of Oak Park Way. And the next image will give you a better idea. You'll see, for lack of a better description, I guess a bat-shaped undeveloped parcel right there in the middle. And in the middle, it's two separate parcels that have been merged, but in the middle is the easement that is being requested to be vacated. The property owner would like to develop the property, and in order to do so, needs to vacate the easement. As I said, the county does not have a current public use for it. There had been some questions with regards to PG&E and AT&T, but the applicant and PG&E and AT&T were able to work to come to a resolution for that, and there are no objections to the vacation of this easement from utility or service providers or residents. So today, the recommendation is to adopt the resolution authorizing the vacation of the public service easement, as we've discussed today, located at the terminus of Oak Parkway and unincorporated Emerald Lake Hills. With that said, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? In that case, they're going to open have a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved. Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Is there any public comment? There being none, can we have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
And seconded by
Second.
Supervisor Canipo. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Done. So next we have the,
President Horsley?
we have the I got it. Just gonna. I'm gonna move you to the other side. So,
A little rusty, huh?
a little rusty. Okay, so I need a motion to adopt the resolution.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Calderon.
Thank you.
So we're on to item number 4, it's the building and planning.
Good morning, President Horsley, members of the board, and Mr. Maltby and Mr. Byers. I'm Steve Monowitz from the Planning and Building Department, pleased to present to you a recommendation by the Planning Commission to amend our second unit ordinance, which is a section of our zoning regulations, in order to comply with California state law and to advance the county's goal of facilitating second units as a valuable source of needed housing. So the purpose of the project is to, as I mentioned, comply with state law, specifically an updated version of state law recently adopted, and to implement the county's general plan, which includes a goal of producing second units as a valuable source of housing. So second units are also referred to as accessory dwelling units, granny units, in-law units. They're typically built on a parcel on which a primary single-family residence exists, and it's in most cases smaller than the primary residence, and it can be either detached or attached to the primary residence. And there are multiple benefits to second units. They're often cheaper to construct, more affordable to occupy. They can provide an income stream for homeowners that enable them to stay in their property longer. They're built as infill development rather than in green areas, typically. They rely on existing infrastructure and in most cases are unobtrusive and secondary in nature to a single-family residence. So we are currently operating under a set of regulations that were adopted in 1984, and they contain limits on where you can place units and other standards. But since that regulation was put in place, there's been changes to state laws that have affected the way in which we are able to implement the existing set of regulations. So, for example, state law prohibits local governments from conducting discretionary reviews of secondary units that are in compliance with our regulations. That's not what our current regulations state. So one of the purposes of the current set of amendments is to make it entirely consistent with state law requirements. In addition, as I mentioned, we are attempting to advance our housing needs, and we want to include objective privacy and design standards. Since there is no longer discretionary review involved in second units, the application of rules intended to ensure that these units are compatible with the neighborhood and respectful of the neighbors need to be clear and objective and able to implement at the building permit stage. So in that regard, what we've done is we've crafted standards that limit the placement of windows and balconies when they're in close proximity to their neighbors. With regard to compliance with state law, it was most recently adopted in 2016, and it requires that local governments apply the new set of state laws beginning January 1st, 2017. Local governments can supplement and create their own versions of that law. It needs to be consistent with that. But if that occurs after January 1st of this year, the period between January 1st and then, the only thing we can apply is state law. With regard to overall county housing policy and our housing element, this board is familiar with the affordable housing crisis that the county faces and the importance of taking urgent action. This was laid out in various hearings and discussions that occurred at this board, and it's also reflected in our county housing element, in particularly Housing Policy 32, which calls for an increase in the production of second units. So the proposed amendments would apply the following regulations on second units. They establish a limit of 750 square feet or 35% of floor area of the primary residence. That's a carryover from our existing regulations. And then an absolute maximum of 1,200 square feet. Our existing regulations provide an absolute maximum of 1,500 square feet. However, the state law appears to set the maximum square footage at 1,200. There's a little bit of confusion as to whether or not local governments have the ability to be more flexible than state law and allow for units larger than 1,200, but we are still awaiting guidance from the state in that regard, and in the meantime have gone with the 1,200 square foot limit that appears to be established by the state law. The maximum height of 26 feet is just barely under the 28-foot height limit that applies in most residential districts, although we do have some residential districts that allow 36-foot height buildings, 3-story buildings. The 26-foot height allows second units of 2 stories, but it ensures that it will be less tall than the primary residence by at least 2 feet. Unless that is the primary residence is shorter. It could exceed the height of the primary residence, but never go higher than 26 feet. And as I mentioned earlier, we limit the placement of balconies, decks, and windows on units taller than 16 feet, so they're not overlooking their neighbor's property. Other changes to the existing regulations, we had an outdated amnesty program, which is no longer applicable, but will be superseded by a new amnesty program that will be coming to this board in the near future. The other change we've made is we've removed a cap on the number of second units allowed. That's expressly prohibited by state law. And then with regard to parking, the proposed amendments require 1 space for every 1 or 2 bedroom second unit, 2 spaces if you go up to 3 bedroom units. And I'll compare that to our existing unit, which currently just requires 1 space per second unit. So in this case, we're actually increasing parking requirements by requiring 2 spaces for a 3-bedroom unit. Then we create the flexibility required by state law in terms of allowing that parking to be tandem, uncovered, compact, and then also we have exemptions from the parking requirements contained in the state law, and that is if you're in certain distance to a transit stop, or if you're within an existing residence or accessory unit, you don't need to provide any additional parking. As I mentioned, there's no discretionary review required. That is unless you request an exception to the standards that are established here. If you can't meet, for example, the more flexible setback standards that we've established in this amendment, you can still request approval through a conditional use permit process, which is discretionary. And I'll just quickly wrap up by noting, this is a change to our zoning that is part of our local coastal program implementation plan. It will need to go to the Coastal Commission for certification, but it doesn't in any way change any existing requirements of our LCP. It's exempt from CEQA, and it was subject to some changes by the Planning Commission, including clarifying language that this does not supersede the LCP. Finally, in conclusion, we would recommend that the board adopt the findings contained in the staff report, that it's consistent with the general plan, that it's consistent with the directive of the board to promote additional housing, and that it's consistent with the LCP and exempt from CEQA. Oops. Okay, and there's the final recommendation: adopt an ordinance and resolution, including provisions to submit this to the Coastal Commission for their certification as part of our local coastal program. Be happy to answer any questions.
Supervisor Grimm?
Thank you, President Horsley. Mr. Monowitz, I'm a little concerned about the no public hearing, no public noticing, no subjective review. I mean, I want to make the process just as quick as possible, but I do think that there should be some public noticing of what's going on in somebody's neighborhood. Now, does the state prohibit that?
Just to be clear, you're talking about the noticing of the application for a second unit, not the noticing for the amendments.
Right.
Right. Well, so in the coastal zone where we do have design review requirements and hearing requirements, yes, we will continue to follow those noticing requirements. However, areas outside the coastal zone where there is no discretionary review, we don't typically notify the public of ministerial actions because there's really no forum for them to object or request changes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make it complicated and I don't want to slow the process down, but I do think that it's good for the neighbors to know what's happening in their own neighborhood.
Agreed. In that regard, more generally, we are working to implement much more advanced interactive database on the Planning and Building website, whereby which you could pull up a map of your neighborhood and see the types of building permit applications that are being applied for. Not just second units, but just what's generally speaking. So we're not there yet, but that's the direction we're going, and we hope to make that information available to anybody who wants to see it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor
Thank you.
Slocum.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just echo Supervisor Groom's perspective on that matter. I find it difficult to accept the fact that people have no forum, and the notion of going to a website to see what's going on in your area is probably a stretch for people. So isn't there, Mr. Fox is here, isn't there some avenue to allow for that notification and for comment? Or is it just strictly prohibited and that's that, end of story?
The actions by the legislature over time have been to erode any local discretionary permitting authority in this arena. And this does seem to be the last legislative effort to say essentially that provision of a secondary dwelling unit on the same property is simply a ministerial permit issuance via a building permit. So while we do have, when people are asking for things that are outside of our parameters, the ability to notify neighbors and provide for a public hearing, if they're asking for a thing that's within the ambit of the state law and our ordinance, they're supposed to have it issued as a matter of course rather than following notification and public input. Now, all of our standards for how things are built will continue to apply, and we are allowed to have objective standards that go into measuring setbacks and total height and all of that. But the question of whether a dwelling unit exists and insofar as it complies with those regulations, how it is built, those all have to be set forth in the ordinance and not a matter of case-by-case decision-making by the public or by the board or by the planning commission. That seems to be the direction the legislature wants this area of the law to go.
Thank you.
Okay, just a follow-up question on that. I mean, it's very clear that, the law prohibits, discretionary review, which I actually think is a good provision of the law. But what about the idea of simply notifying people? I mean, just say, under state law, your neighbor is building this unit by right, and there's nowhere for you to go, but at least they know that the house three blocks down the street, otherwise they may assume they have a venue. I mean, they don't in this case because of the fact that the state law says no review if you comply with the provisions.
Yeah, I was just thinking with Mr. Gibson about whether or not there would be an ability to, for example, issue upon application for a building permit notification within a certain radius. But while we're kind of digging into whether or not that might actually even be preempted and prohibited by state law. Why don't you go ahead?
Good morning, Supervisors. We believe, and I believe this is actually a carryover from existing state law, not specifically in the latest iteration, the public noticing of the ministerial application of the second unit regulations is prohibited. We can clarify that because it's not in the newest law, and that's all I have on me right now, because portions of the law have been existing since approximately over the last 10 years. They've changed the law several times. But our belief is the notice for these ministerial actions is prohibited by state law. Were the board to adopt this today, we can clarify that. I think there may be other changes that the board intends to have us come back with further clarification on, and that could be one of those. But at this point, that's our belief. We were prohibited from that notice.
Supervisor Gray?
Would it be permissible if when somebody was given a permit to do a secondary unit, that we could say to them, it would be good neighborly for you to tell your neighbors what you're doing? I mean, could we remind them of that? I just think it's really hard. You live in a neighborhood and somebody's hammering and nailing one day, and it's the first you've turned about is when you back your car out of your driveway.
I think that's possible. I think you're touching on a broader issue, and that was one of the things that was going through my mind as we asked this. If we're going to notify neighbors of a second unit, should we also notify them of a major remodel or addition? And
I thought we did. I guess I thought we did notify them of a major remodel.
Only if there's a discretionary permit required.
Okay.
In many districts, it's simply a building permit, and we don't provide notice of building permits. But that being said, I do think that people who do receive building permits, it should be clearly demarked on their property that they have the proper permits to do the construction and so forth. And so they are supposed to, have a copy of the building permit on file and posted. And I think we can improve upon that as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve.
Sure.
Any other questions? Supervisor Pine?
I do. Over the weekend and yesterday, I really kind of dug into this and had a chance to talk to Steve Monowitz. I think this tool is one of the more important ones we have to create housing, and we all know, of course, how paramount that is. I really like the fact that it's less costly to build, and that it allows the primary residents to generate some income and stay in their home. And I think, the state law was helpful. And I know in the future, we're even going to go as far as appropriately so to look at some kind of amnesty for existing units, because we don't want to necessarily lose those. So the issue that I wanted to raise with my colleagues, and I'll let Mr. Monowitz talk to some specifics, is anytime you do housing, there's a balance between getting the housing and the impact on the neighborhood. And for, 50 years, or in the peninsula, even the community has pushed us to, in my opinion, to defer more to the impacts, and the pendulum hasn't gone over as far to the housing. So, I read through all this with that lens and said, well, is there anything in here we should loosen up, that we should liberalize, that might create more housing? So I came up with 4 ideas, all of which I spoke to Steve about, and I'll let Steve walk through them. Two of them you touched on already, and some I think are straightforward. Some maybe not, and it simply comes down to the judgment of this board, on this pendulum of impact versus more incentive to create housing. So if it's acceptable to colleagues, maybe Steve could walk through the 4. Maybe you could start with the 2 you already touched on, which was the 1,200 versus 1,500, and
yes.
You touched on parking too.
Absolutely. So if you go to the recommended ordinance, which is section 642(5) and 6, it's subsection 4 establishes the limits on the floor area. And as I mentioned, the carryover from our existing ordinance is the limit on 750 square feet or 35% of the floor area of the existing primary residence, whichever is larger, with then a maximum cap of 1,500 is what is in our current ordinance. The one that's before you today establishes a maximum cap of 1,200 square feet, and that's based on language in the state law. As I mentioned, it's unclear whether or not local governments have the authority to be more liberal than the state law with regard to footprint limits. We went with the 1,200 square foot because that was our best reading of the state law, but we have no objection to going to 1,500 should that be in conformance with state law.
So I think the question for the board is, I don't think we'd be able to make this change today because we're not sure what state law says. But if we found out that state law allowed 1,500, would this board be comfortable with that? So I guess maybe I could turn to my colleagues, or do you want to hear all four of them first? Either way.
Okay. So the next one with regard to parking, the change that's being made is currently the regulations just require one additional parking space for a second unit, irrespective of the number of bedrooms. In the new regulation, we are saying that one space is required for second units of up to 2 bedrooms, but once you get to 3 bedrooms, you need to provide a second on-site parking space. So the option that I discussed with Supervisor Pine was to simply maintain our existing regulations, one space per second unit, irrespective of the number of bedrooms.
You know, if I might add, of the four that you'll hear, this is probably the toughest because we know that one of the reasons accessory dwellings, neighbors are always worried about parking. And I think the judgment call here is that it's pretty rare you're going to find room for 2 additional spaces on the site. So we had the old law that only forced 1 regardless of size. Again, we have to come back and hear from my colleagues, but that's kind of the judgment call.
You end up putting them on the lawn.
What?
Essentially, you end up putting them on the front setback, essentially.
Yeah, well, again, today, and people, of course, are parking on the streets, which is concerning the neighbors. Again, this is a question of impact versus liberalization.
And then the other two had to do with the location of the front door to a second unit. This is subsection 8, entitled Ingress and Egress. Once again, a carryover from our existing regulations. It basically states that a second unit needs to have primary access, either on the side or rear of the property, that you can't essentially have 2 front doors fronting onto the street. I think that was a design element carried over from our old regulations and not one that is very significant in my view in terms of its importance. So should we want to increase the flexibility and allow a second unit to have its front door fronting on the street, the department doesn't have much concern with that.
Right. So the proposal here would be that if it's not feasible to do side or back, so in other words, you do side or back if it's feasible, but if it for some reason wasn't feasible, you could do front.
Exactly. And then finally, we discussed required setbacks. We are currently recommending minimum setbacks of 5 feet, except in an instance if you're going to have a second unit that's taller than 16 feet, so it's certainly going to be like a 2-story structure, then the rear setback should be 10 feet. And so Supervisor Pine and I discussed the option of just sticking with a minimum 5-foot rear setback, even if you do go over 16 feet. And given the other design limits that we placed on here that would restrict you from placing windows or balconies that overlooked your neighbor's backyard, we feel that such a change would be acceptable from the department's perspective.
So if it's okay, Mr. President, maybe we should go back and get the board feedback, one by one on those.
Okay.
So what did we start with, Mr. Moore?
Yeah, well, let's start first with the setbacks for 2-story, whether or not.
Go in the other order?
Yeah, so rather than requiring a 10-foot rear setback for a 2-story second unit, reduce that to 5.
Well, I'll just make the first comment. I would not be willing to support that. I do like the idea of the 10-foot setback. I mean, I do think that, you have a 5-foot setback, you're pretty close to your neighbor. They may have a 10-foot or 20-foot setback in their yard, but nevertheless, it just, I think you just generate an awful lot of bad feeling in that neighborhood. So I don't think for one, would not be willing to accept that as a change. Other thoughts?
Yeah, other thoughts?
Yeah, thank you.
Slocum?
Thank you, Mr. President. It just seems like with some of the things that you said earlier about, maybe it was Mr. Gibson that said, we think that the law says there's no avenue for people to come forward, but it didn't sound like you were certain of that you were going to do some more research on that or talking to the state.
He passed me a note a few moments ago saying public notice is definitely prohibited. But that being the case, I'd like to observe that, as I stated earlier, that you can request a conditional use permit for situations where you can't meet the setback. So using this rear setback example, if you want to build a 2-story unit and you can't meet the 10-foot setback, you can request a conditional use permit. And once you do that, that does put it in the realm of discretionary review with notice and so forth. Okay. So it's not that it's completely prohibited, it's just not favored, and it would require discretionary review.
Okay, thank you. So maybe my point is just with these suggested changes and the other things that you may be thinking about, maybe it makes sense to bring this matter back with all these four, I guess, changes.
Yeah, well, Mr. Byers, you might want to describe the procedural situation.
Sure, yeah, and my planning lawyer will correct me if I'm wrong. But, so you've got a couple choices today. To the extent the board is interested in making changes to what's before you, to make any sort of material or substantive changes to what's before you, pursuant to our local rule, our zoning regulation, and it's 6553 of our zoning regs, it would have to be sent back to the Planning Commission. So again, any changes today would have to go back to the Planning Commission for report and review, and then they would do what they do, and then it would come back to the board for adoption once again. Now that could take, the best case scenario, 2 to 3 months. In the meantime, if that were the avenue you wanted to go, as Mr. Mono has pointed out, state law has already kicked in effective January 1st, 2017. So the longer you wait, what it means is our local law, the one before you today, if you don't adopt it, there's no local law that applies. It's state law that applies. So state law preempts. So people come in for ADU, permit applications are basically going under the state second dwelling unit law. Okay, so state law applies. The second option you would have would be to, again, if this is the will of the board, to adopt what's before you today, but then, so you've now adopted local law, but then ask that the Planning Commission consider certain amendments, whatever those amendments might be, whatever consensus you can reach today, that the Planning Commission might study in due time, and then come back with an amended second dwelling unit ordinance. So those are the two options.
Yeah, I think the proper course of action clearly is, to adopt what's been proposed today, so we get that behind us. Mm-hmm. And then I think we have two choices. We could either give all 4 of these things to the Planning Commission and have them think about them and bring them back to us, or if the board wants to just knock 1 or 2 or all of them off, they could do that. So, that procedurally, I think that's our choices,
Supervisor Pine, could you just clarify why you think it's important to adopt this now?
Well, I'm really kind of following Mr. Byers' lead, is the existing ordinance as proposed. So put aside my 4 liberalizations. If we don't adopt it now and we wait until these other 4 are further fleshed out, we'll have a long period of time where we don't have a local ordinance.
I got it. Thank you.
Then the state ordinance applies.
Yeah, I'm
Supervisor Graham?
I think we should adopt the state ordinance so we can get on with this.
County ordinance.
But if it's okay, if it's okay, I would be okay with the cap of 1,500, and I would be okay with the front door moving to wherever. I'm a little worried about the 5 foot. I'm 5 feet tall, and I don't, if I stretched myself out, I might be pretty close to you as a neighbor. So, that we might want to, and then I do think, I am worried about the parking. Everybody, and there's not a street in San Mateo County that there's an extra parking place on anymore. And I think that, maybe we don't have to be quite as rigid, but maybe we should do do your darndest to find that extra parking place. And if you just can't, then maybe we could make an exception. But I think that we all hear constantly, I can't park on my own block anymore. And so if we ease up on parking, I think we're just contributing to that kind of sense of uneasiness that people have.
So I maybe again, maybe we want to hear. I mean, I think Supervisor Horsley, you were uncomfortable with the setback. On the setback and parking, which are probably the toughest ones. We have. I guess we need to hear from Supervisor Slocum and Supervisor Canada. Do you want the Planning Commission to study them, or do you just think they're ideas that we should put aside? On the 5-foot setback and making the parking only one space, no matter what the size.
Actually, I'm fine with actually sending all of your suggested changes to planning, or
That's the other way to
Planning
do it.
Commission, and then have it come back to us, so we can do
fine.
that, as
You
opposed
get
to us.
more. At least you get the benefit.
It's
of
kind
the
of
thinking.
tough for us to figure it out today with.
I think
right,
that's a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. Supervisor Canepa, do you have
I
any
just
comment?
wanted to concur with Supervisor Groom as well as Supervisor Pine. I think the prudent course of action is to adopt this action today, and then in addition to that, I think what we should do. I think your suggestions were good. I like the 1,500 feet as well as the location for the front door. But considering what Mr. Byers had said around certain provisions, I think we should move forward with the adoption today, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions, comments, or anything? Just one question I have is, well, we're talking about if the second unit have 35% of the floor area of, 750 to 1,200 square feet. Does that mean, so for example, if you have a 5,000 square foot lot, 20-foot setback in the back, 20 in the front, and essentially you've maximized the house size already, can you actually now put a second unit up to 700 square feet?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, you can. The
So the
floor area is based on the size of the main residence. So you take 35% of the square footage of the main residence.
If the residence on that property already meets, well, doesn't necessarily exceeds, but meets the floor area ratio for that parcel, can that unit or the house have a second unit?
Yes, it can.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Do you want me to make the motion?
Yeah, well, I do want you to make the motion.
Mr. President.
Thank you.
I move that we adopt an ordinance amending Chapter 22.5, Second Unit Ordinance of Division 6, Part 1 zoning regs to comply with the requirements
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
of California Accessory Dwelling Unit Law, Government Code Section 65821-1, and to advance the county's goal of facilitating the production of second units as a valuable source of needed housing, and further suggest that we have the Planning Commission review Supervisor Pine's suggestions and then revisit this.
Is there a second?
Second.
And before we vote, we have a public comment. Just saw this note.
Yes, from Maureen Lennon.
Good morning, Supervisors. I am in District 3 on the coast, and we welcome this. This is a wonderful way for us to integrate new workers and residents into our coastal neighborhood without shocking us, which is what some of the other developments in the process are planning to do. I don't know how this works. I had written a statement, which each one of you will get. I'd like to read it for public statement, but not all of it is about this issue, so I don't know if I'm in the right venue here for making this statement, but I'd like to go ahead with it. It's about 3 minutes.
Well, if you could summarize it really quickly without reading the whole.
I actually would like to spend 3 minutes, if that's okay.
Okay, we'll give you 3 minutes.
Thank you. So congratulations, Mr. Horsley, on your appointment by your esteemed colleagues to be president this year. The homeowners and residents on the coast look forward to you representing your constituent issues this year for the good of our beautiful and pristine coastal environment and our sense of community. I'm here representing in front of this voting board the concerns of a large contingency of coastal residents concerned that the board has seemed to bless several projects to go forward on the coast absent of a holistic understanding of the collective impact on the environment and the communities. Your end of the year message, Mr. Horsley, about the accomplishments, the tunnel being one of the big ones, which is great. You state that a clear 70% of the development currently in the county planning department are for your district, our district. The overdevelopment of the coast is going to lessen, not enhance, the visitor's experience. We residents are landlocked on the weekend, and the morning commute down to the 92 for South Bay workers is a slow roll parking lot. Last weekend was clear. I won't go into what happened, but all the shutdowns created absolute log jams on the coast. Accidents on 92, shutdown of the highway in Pacifica, tree across the road in Moss Beach. It was a nightmare. The board has given its tentative approval of the mid-pen purchase of property on Carlos. I wonder if any of you have ever driven on Carlos, where the plans intend to bring 160 commuters, low-income employees, so I assume they will be commuting, per day off of Sierra onto Carlos to turn right or left onto the Coast Highway. I drive Carlos every day. It's wide enough for one car at a time, unlined, and with a blind curve that is a head-on accident prone. Putting an oversized apartment development in that area makes no sense. It would be the same as putting an apartment development on the corner of Lakeview and Emerald Hills and then expecting everybody to make it down that windy road to get to the Highway 280. It just wouldn't work. No one disagrees that our coastal agricultural workers need affordable housing, but the north side of the coast makes no sense. The agriculture is on the south side of Half Moon Bay. I'm almost done. We ask that you be the great negotiator and consider approaching Mid-Penn Regional Open Space to purchase this 11 acres from the teachers union and preserve it as a historical site that it deserves to be, and ask Mid-Penn Housing to purchase property south of 92 for affordable housing. This is where it makes more sense. The highway between Sam's and the highway is literally at a crawl. Add to that 1,500 more cars that are anticipated with the big wave development, and you're advocating that a beautiful weekend and vacation retreat stretch on the coast highway become a logistical nightmare. Unlike the peninsula, where there are exits to get off and out of a traffic jam, here on the coast we don't have that option. Please don't chase revenue by ruining our coastal environment that we should be preserving and protecting. Thank you for your time. Your constituency looks forward to discussing these issues with you further on Wednesday night. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Lennon. We gave you 6 minutes, so.
Appreciate it.
Please let my constituents know, if you would, please. Thanks. In any case, so we now had a motion and a second, and all in favor signify by saying aye
Yes.
Aye.
or yes. Thank you.
Mr. President Horsley, if I may make just one final comment.
Yeah.
This is related, but not directly, doesn't directly affect the ordinance. So, again, I was kind of doing some reading about this whole second unit potential. And I was surprised to learn that in the city of Vancouver, 1/3 of their rental housing is with accessory units. So I didn't have a chance to really look into it too deeply, but it seems like other ways to incentivize these units are to think about potentially reduced building fees, and or, perhaps different building regulations in terms of what's required in the structure.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it'd be helpful to get a report, some feedback from the staff on those ideas when they have time to do so.
With permission of the president, I can quickly do it, or be happy to come back.
I'm going to make one public comment here. That as long as I'm the president, I can do whatever I want, I guess, for the most part. But in any case, your letter, Ms. Lennon, says that we have tentatively approved. We have not. It has not come to the Planning Commission, and I just want to let you know that that's inaccurate. So that's it. So, Mr. Monowitz.
So Supervisor Pine commented on the potential for second units and what some other jurisdictions have done to really incentivize those. And I failed to mention in my presentation some of the other things that are going on in the Planning and Building Department toward that end. I did mention the amnesty program, and as part of that program, we will be looking at flexibility in our building standards with regard to second units. We also...
Forward and back.
I'm sorry?
The flexibility standards would go backwards and forwards. In other words, with amnesty, you typically have a situation where somebody hasn't done things right, and then you say, okay, we'll give you a pass. But does that mean future people get the same flexibility?
Yes.
Oh, that'd be a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And then the other aspect is we are working on executing a contract with a design or architectural firm that could develop template blueprints for second units that we would run through the design review process on the coast ahead of time. Okay. So what we would have essentially is pre-approved plans that property owners could use for free in order to obtain the permits they need to build the unit. And then we will be trying to market a second unit program to appropriate areas of the county as well.
I just got to point out that the idea about second units actually came about because of our Jobs Housing Gap Task Force. And we actually looked at one county that has been very successful at this is Santa Cruz. So Supervisor Slocum, did you want to make any comments on that?
Yes, but not about Santa Cruz. Are you?
That's okay. I don't mind.
All right. So my question is pretty simple. When is the amnesty program coming to this board?
It will need to go to the Planning Commission, and I'd say we're probably about 2-3 months out.
Well, we've tentatively targeted to come before the board in July.
So board in July.
And the amnesty program, I assume, means that the person would have to make sure that their building meets all of our building codes, correct?
Yeah, what we're going to look at is whether or not there are some areas of the code where some flexibility makes sense in terms of trying to legalize existing structures. And, you know, where we land on that is yet to be seen, but we will be looking at the full set of codes. We obviously won't be waiving any code requirements we think are important for health and safety, but we will be looking at providing flexibility where we believe those changes wouldn't undermine health and safety.
Okay. Supervisor Slocum?
What is the relationship between the red tag ordinance that's coming back, I think, on January 24th, and this amnesty program?
So the red tag ordinance is intended to provide us with a tool in situations where we find illegal units that are unsafe and that need to be shut down for habitation because they're unsafe. And it enables us to find replacement housing for the tenants and to fund the temporary housing until the unit can either be legalized or the tenant can find alternative locations. So really it's another tool to help us help displace tenants in an illegal unit.
Thank you.
So it sounds like, which is great, the regulations are under consideration. And I guess maybe you could give some thought to fees while you're at it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
President Horsley, before we leave this topic, if I could bother the board to consider one more motion, and that would be Part B, which is to adopt the resolution directing staff to submit the second unit ordinance to the California Coastal Commission for review and certification.
Thank you.
I don't think I'll make that motion.
So moved.
Second.
Wait a minute, who made the motion?
Dave.
Oh, Dave made the motion, and the second was?
Slocum.
Slocum? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Monowitz. Next is a public works item about the prima facie speed limit on Alpine Road. And you have made a number of my constituents happy.
Yeah, that's for sure.
With reducing
Thank you,
the speed.
President Horsley. Members of the board, Mr. Maltby and Mr. Byers, we have a series of 3 items coming before you now. But why don't we start off, with traffic regulations. Can we get that in the slideshow? Perfect. Aha, okay. So to refresh the board's memory on some of the work we've been doing on Alpine Road, we have a variety of projects on Alpine Road, but one that is related to this item is the traffic study work that we've been doing on Alpine. As you know, traffic has become quite congested on Alpine, so we've done a comprehensive study on ways to improve the movement of vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles through the corridor, as well as ways to enhance safety for those folks and try to provide a corridor that's functioning better. As part of that review, we had our consultant conduct a traffic speed zone survey for the entirety of Alpine Road. Currently, Alpine Road is signed for 40 miles an hour on the northern section, 45 miles an hour in the section near the interchange, and 35 miles an hour on the southerly end. Through the speed zone surveys, the prevailing speeds that have been reported allow us to convert the entirety of Alpine Road to 35 miles an hour. So this will allow law enforcement to enforce by radar a 35 mile an hour speed limit on that corridor. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
That was the best ever. Any other questions on this? Okay, what's the?
Mr. Rose, I wish your constituents are here to thank you.
Janet Davis should be here to thank us. But in that case, this is great. So, what's the pleasure of the board for motions?
I recommend that we introduce the ordinance amending Chapter 7.04 of the San Mateo County Ordinance Code regarding prima facie speed limits on Alpine Road, waive the reading of the ordinance in its entirety, and adopt items A and B.
Is there a second? Supervisor Slocum? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. The next, Mr. Porter, is once again the introduction of an amendment to the ordinance on repealing a crosswalk.
Thank you, President Horsley. This is really a cleanup issue. Our county ordinance code includes the crosswalk in question, which is on Industrial in San Carlos. That area was an unincorporated county area. It has since been annexed by the city of San Carlos, and this is a matter of removing this crosswalk from our ordinance code. That concludes my presentation.
Okay, again, is there a motion?
I'll move approval.
A second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Now we have number 7. Oh, once again.
Thank you, President Horsley. This is a change to the ordinance code that's really predicated by a change in state law regarding crosswalks. So when you install crosswalks on multi-lane highways, you're now required to install yield to pedestrian signs between 20 and 50 feet from that crosswalk. This update to the ordinance code gives the Department of Public Works the ability to install these without going to the board on each event, as well as provides us the authority to look at every single crosswalk that we have in this county and look at the applicability of installing the yield to pedestrian signs with the crosswalks. And that is basically an evaluation of sight distance and visibility of the pedestrians. So this will essentially delegate to the department our ability to perform these necessary safety enhancements. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Porter. Is there a motion?
I may just do two quick questions.
Yeah, sure.
I'm curious, Mr. Porter, if you happen to know off the top of your head, how many of these marked or unmarked crosswalks do we have?
Through the president, I don't have an exact number, but there's literally hundreds of these out there in the unincorporated county area. So we have traffic operations folks out on the roads, I won't say daily, but regularly. We also have our road ops folks. And so they're out there looking at these intersections, making sure that we're complying with state law and providing adequate notice to motorists of pedestrians. So there's quite a few out there.
And so you're looking at the state law, or at least the one sentence that was in the report, and it says that these yield here to pedestrian signs must, we're required to use them. So that means you're going to put them, I guess you're going to put them everywhere.
So they must be used on multi-lane roadways. So it's discretionary if it's a single-lane road.
I see.
That's the only difference, really, from.
And then the other part, which seems completely discretionary, it says parking should, not must, be prohibited in the area.
Correct.
So I guess you're going to assess that as well.
We will. And if there is a circumstance where we need to prohibit parking, we will bring that back to your board. Only your board has authority to implement the no parking zone. So that would come to you on a case-by-case basis.
So the thinking must be that improves pedestrian safety?
It would really be dependent upon sight distance. If there's a visibility issue where a motorist coming down the road can't see a pedestrian on a sidewalk, and by clearing that space, by providing a no parking zone within 50 feet of the sidewalk, if it allows greater visibility to the pedestrian, that's where we would consider it. And a lot of that depends on the geometry of the roadway as well as the speed of the motorist. So that's why there's a bit of discretion allowed here.
I think this is a terrific thing. The pedestrian is really a moving target these days.
Yeah.
People go too fast, they don't stop, they slide through, and I don't think pedestrians stand much of a chance on busy streets anymore.
Yeah, and it's not like you can get hit a little bit by a car. I mean,
yeah.
So on this issue of assessing the parking, I guess my input would be to be pretty aggressive about prohibiting the parking, and I guess if you need feedback from us on that trade-off between parking and safety, however, I guess you could bring it back here. I mean, people always complain and get rid of parking, but to Supervisor Groom's point, if we save a life.
I entirely agree. And every no parking zone that we install, we'll be bringing to your board for approval. So you will, well, it's required by ordinance code.
Oh,
so
they'll come back?
Yeah. All the no parking zones will come back to your board.
Oh, the no parking zones, yeah.
Right. This designates the yield signs to the department, but the no parking zones come back to the board.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
We introduce an ordinance establishing section 7.88.2 yield here to pedestrians, and waive the reading of the ordinance in its entirety.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That brings us to number 8, the county manager's report.
Mr. President, members of the board, there are 3 things I want to call to your attention in the report this morning. First, to congratulate Mr. Porter on his election to the as Secretary of the California Engineers Association of California, proving that he didn't attend the meeting where he was selected. But it is an honor, and in fact, it's the 3rd time our county has been honored with a future president of the association. I want to congratulate Jim. Second, to point out to you that, as I think the board is aware, the 6-month period in which the FAA has provided for an alternate route for Surf Air using the San Carlos Airport has now ended, which means Surf Air is going back to the original route for all of its flights, and the FAA will use the next 6 months to evaluate and get community input regarding whether that routing should be put into place permanently. And lastly, on January 26th, we'll do our biannual homeless count. We still need volunteers, particularly in the north, and thank Supervisor Canepa for being helpful in getting volunteers to help us do the count. This year, for the first time, we're combining the census with a survey. So we're going to be talking to folks that are homeless and hopefully gleaning some insight in what it is we can do in order to further our goal of ending homelessness in this county by 2020. So with that, Mr. President and members of the board, if you have any questions on my report, I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah. Mr. Mulvey, you didn't mention that somebody did something super creative on the Children's Fund.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to see that photo because I mean, it seemed like it just really resonated with people. 500
gifts through Amazon.com and many of the county's children that are benefited from the Children's Fund were able to have a little bit brighter Christmas this year.
So
which
if that was Michelle or whoever.
It was Michelle and the HSA folks. They did a great job.
Good.
Any other comments or questions?
I had
Supervisor Slocum?
just a quick comment, and maybe Mr. Baltby, we can talk about this offline. But it's about the recommended revision to the master salary ordinance, specifically the creation of this new unit to manage construction projects. And maybe I could just comment, we could talk about, I just had a couple of questions about where they're going to be and who's going to supervise what and so on and so on. But we'll
happy
do
to talk
that.
to you about it.
Thank you. That's all for me.
No other question? Board members' reports. Supervisor Groom?
President Horsley, I sadly have been saving adjourned memories as we scooted through the holidays. So if you'll indulge me, got a couple. The first is Ernest Davis Sr., who is was the devoted father of Marie Davis, one of our more prominent performers in this county. Mr. Davis was the president of the San Mateo chapter of the NAACP for 10 years and made lots and lots of inroads in our cities and our counties for African Americans. He was a great leader, and he will be missed by all of his colleagues at the NAACP. The second one is for Marianne Gardner, who many of you will know is one of the daughters of J. Hart Clinton, longtime resident of San Mateo. She died not long ago. She was a graduate of San Mateo High and Stanford University, and worked on the San Mateo Times when her father was and John Clinton were there for many, many years. And she was a very good friend to an awful lot of people in San Mateo County. Another one is for Chuck Saylor, a resident of Woodside, husband of Mary Ann Saylor, who has been a great not-for-profit leader in this county. And Chuck was always carting her around, helping her raise money and helping her put on many of her projects. And he died in November after a long battle with cancer. He too will be missed. And the last one is for Eve Ratto, who is the mother of Peter Ratto, who is a longtime transportation leader in this county and is presently serving on the Samtrans board. And she died on January 13th in South San Francisco.
No report. Supervisor Pine?
No. No report.
Okay, I just want to thank DPW for their work this storm season. I was in contact with them and HSA as well, that they did really a great job of being ready to, in the event that there's some floodings, for example, in Belmont or even Redwood City in the trailer parks, they were actually pretty prepared and well prepared to actually provide services to our residents. And out in Pescadero, they actually are dredging help to some extent. It didn't stop, the road did get closed, but the fire station did not flood, and the town did not flood as well. So at least that project, well, you know, it's not perfect, but it made it somewhat better than it would otherwise have been. And the whole system actually worked pretty well. Fire department did a great job as well. And that's it. We will now retire to closed session. Okay, we're back from closed session. Mr. Byers, can you report on the results of closed session?
Yes, thank you, President Horsley. The board took two actions in closed session, both unanimous, 5-0 vote. The first was to authorize a settlement of $127,000 to be paid by defendant Standard & Poor's to the County of San Mateo in the matter of County of San Mateo versus AMBAC. The second action item was, for, again, on a unanimous vote, was in the case of Jennings versus Rodriguez, wherein the board authorized a joinder in an amicus curiae brief with Santa Clara County, which is in a case that's before the U.S. Supreme Court, an immigration case of great importance, and the board authorized the county's joinder in filing an actual friend of the court brief with Santa Clara County, because the board view is that that's a case that is important to San Mateo County residents, and the board wants to have a voice.
Thanks, Mr. Byers. That concludes the board meeting, and we'll adjourn.